Hi everyone. So I was inspired to sort of create a set of slides relating to a paper that I recently read, a few papers actually, primarily from the works of Iris Murdoch, a philosopher who inspired me, and Sylvia Peniza. So Sylvia Peniza is less commonly known philosopher, but I engage. She does a lot of work in moral psychology, moral philosophy in general, and animal rights. And animal rights specifically is something that I'm particularly passionate about. So this paper is primarily concerning the ways in which animals can actually serve as our teachers, and it's not to say that they can stand up on their hind legs and start speaking in the English language or whatever and sort of teach us in that sense, but rather that they when we actually engage with the world with a sort of intentive, loving gaze, as Iris Murdoch would call it, or as Akil Bilgrami, if you watch my last video, would call it, a sort of engaged practical agency stance, we would notice and identify ways in which animals contain not only value but ways in which they sort of bring about sort of moral attention. And for Iris Murdoch specifically, sort of ethics and morality is concerning itself with seeing clearly. There's in many ways there's not we can sort of present a syllogistic argument as to why you disvalue an animal that has certain properties or traits that humans also have, and it sort of boils down to effectively seeing animals only as having worth insofar as they have like a little human inside them. And yeah, I think to step away from that, we need to start recognizing we should start recognizing the ways in which animals, or as it would say here, the animal is not waiting for us to create her value. There's already value within this animal. So if we get started, so this is going to be just to quit before I quickly move forward. It's going to be concerning itself with Sylvia's work primarily, from two of her papers, and that's also going to be concerning Iris Murdoch's work, Simone Weil's work, and Zen teachings. And we're focusing now in this first paper on how animals can be our teachers. So one of the central questions is what if the moral failure begins before the obvious cruelty? Before confinement, transport, or slaughter, an animal can disappear inside a category: product, unit, stock, yield. So I was kind of going over this in my last paper when I was talking about Akil Bilgrami's work and the ways in which animals and their identity and their unique traits and capacities are entirely hidden behind what they can provide us with, and rather we don't see them as someone or something to be eaten. So the first paper here is regarding specifically the topic of animals do not only receive our attention, they can teach us how to attend. Apologize for the phone in the background. And paper two is concerning itself with how attention can disclose value. I need not manufacture value inside the mind, which is very reminiscent of what Bilgrami also has to say. So part one is going to be concerning itself with animals as teachers. So I'm going to demonstrate 4 encounters that reveal 4 ethical capacities that are relevant to animals. So part two is going to deal with our sense of self and our sort of, the way that we engage with the world as a sort of isolated self, contained within the mind. So this is very relevant to Murdoch, Weil, and Zen. And there are some slight disagreements here and some more substantive disagreements as well. So we'll go over the sort of minor and the substantive disagreements in a bit. But the third part is animal rights and realism. So there is a sort of bleeding over effect here between the sort of meta ethics and the normative ethics, and they do sort of depend upon each other in at least Sylvia's, Murdoch's, and Weil's work. at least from my perspective. So attention helps us see the lives institutions hide, such as factory farming, certain, animal products, the packaging, the sort of labels and the names that we use, all of these semantics that we put forward at the forefront of our attention instead of seeing the individual who's being harmed. So this is where I think things get interesting. Animals as teachers of attention. So this is going to concern itself with how dogs, a horse, and a cat expose the limits of human attention. So I think before we go into this, it's probably important to take into consideration the ways in which us as human beings can be fallibilistic, and our capability is limited insofar as what we can be attentive to, or what we can be aware of. To sort of be an intelligent, knowledgeable person, I personally think, is to understand the limitations of your capacity and to acknowledge that there's things that you don't even know that you don't know. There's this sort of higher order of lack of knowledge or lack of awareness. And it's a sort of humbling awareness. And there's ways in which we can potentially think of, for instance, you can envision your pet dog, or a dog, as someone, right? Someone who has a life of their own, who has their own wants and needs and their own likes and dislikes, their own preferences, their favorite spots to play, their favorite lakes to swim in, their favorite foods to eat, etc. And not only that, but we can consider an example of potentially a dog looking at oneself in the mirror. This dog has this purely objective stance of the state of affairs, as opposed to the human that may be sort of this, that views oneself almost in an illusory sense as a skin, sort of encapsulated ego. It's just encapsulated by this sort of flesh. We're just like stuck in this skull. So yeah, that's I just sort of going off topic a little bit there, but it's relevant. But I'm sort of waffling a little bit, so we'll move on to the next bit. So one of the key concepts here, very key concepts, is moral attention, and this is going to come up a lot here. So attention is not merely about looking hard at something, right? For Sylvia, its ethical quality lies in how reality is met. So there's a relationality here between what we're viewing, what we're perceiving, and the way that reality is lighting up to us. So it is truth-seeking, right? When we see things clearly, when we see vulnerability within an animal, we're seeing truth, right? We're identifying an object in the world, a being in the world, in a very engaged sense. So without possession, fantasy, or prejudice, there's what's only left when we negate this sort of possessive, fantasy-fueled, prejudice way of thinking. We are left only with a receptive, loving, answerable, and attentive gaze on the animal. So better attention can make us morally better. And I think if ethics is concerning itself with anything, then character is primary, and improving one's own character in the way that we respond to certain moral dilemmas, not in purely a sort of, I have certain views on different normative theories, but if we're only thinking of sort of units of satisfaction or pleasure, or consequentialist or sort of duties, we lose the individual. So next we go on to ordinary attention and ethical attention. So a neutral model would look something like: select what matters for a task, follow what is salient, prepare for action. Now, we can think of other normative theories that I was just touching on, such as utilitarianism, act utilitarianism, rule utilitarianism, these forms of consequentialism. And we can also think of deontology, which is, founded on the presupposition that there's certain duties and obligations that we have. Certain actions just bottom out at being intrinsically wrong, independent of consequences, independent of character, independent of context and particular sets of circumstances. Excuse me. So Sylvia and Iris Murdoch, would say that ethics is concerning itself with trying to see what is really there. Notice distortion from fear, habit, or self-interest. Let reality affect the response. So reality is what comes first, and our character responds to certain ways. So of course, character in the sense of the self, the individual being, is of course primary, but the world gives us reasons. So Animals move from objects of study to teachers. That's what I really want this to demonstrate. So the usual direction, the way that we usually think about things is, as a human observer, we see an animal as an object. The way that Sylvia's work is reversing this is that we're seeing animal attention, and then we're learning about ethics from moral attention. So the hierarchy of knower and known begins to loosen. There are things that animals can be aware of, whether or not they have propositional attitudes or knowledge or intelligence that we lack awareness of or knowledge of, and they can be our teachers if we actually look clearly. And maybe we get a little less lost in abstraction and syllogisms for the time being. So we'll first begin with a dog. So objectivity begins by removing noise. The obstacle in the way is going to be nervous speculation, projection, pride, and the stories that we impose. The lesson that we're trying to learn is to look steadily, let the object interrupt you, such as the animal, that allows us to learn about ourselves and ethics. And do not rush to make it about yourself, right? Do not purely focus on the ego. A lot of people may see this and think, I'm not exactly sure what we can learn from animals. I mean, we have agency, we're rational beings. Animals are merely, fallible creatures, and they don't have certain propositional knowledge, they don't have, higher order thinking, metacognition, etc. So, we can look at an example. For instance, there is a dog by the name of Bobby. We can consider, a sort of... think of a sort of concentration camp setting. Prisoners during the Second World War in Nazi Germany in certain concentration camps were being treated and seen as less than human. They were being dehumanized, right? They were seen as vermin. They were seen as animals, right? Already sort of highlighting this very problematic way that we've continuously seen animals as lesser in very meaningful ways. So Bobby the dog greeted them as people whose presence mattered. All of the Nazis in Nazi Germany that dehumanized animals through propaganda, dogma, and fear primarily. The dogs didn't view them in this way because dogs don't have these same sort of like distortive sort of these distorted ways of thinking, and they see reality for how it really is. So attention can be creative, and it recognizes value where social vision has gone blind. So the Nazis in Nazi Germany were looking purely through this like social vision, this veil of ignorance, and they were losing loving attention, which the dog had all along, Bobby the dog. So now we can go to Clever Hans the horse. He was labeled by many as being extraordinarily attentive. As far as I remember from reading the paper by Sylvia, Clever Hans was not credited for the sort of incredible intelligence that he had, the loving attention that he had, and the ways in which he acted as a teacher to other people. He had empathetic attunement, the humans, we failed him, right, effectively. So there's another example. Moving on from hopefully a last sad example, Jean the cat, which is Sylvia's cat that she brings into the paper. She called forth for a response from Sylvia, through touching, through purring, and a response kept bringing wandering attention back. She kept redirecting Sylvia's attention back to petting a cat, and even the purring of cats, if I'm not mistaken, can decrease human anxiety and has certain mental health benefits for humans. Just being around animals, engaging with them, touching their soft fur, expressing this relational love with them, it can help us learn about ourselves and the world. So the object of attention was not merely the cats, it was the living relation they created together. Again, relationality is key here. Excuse me. Going goes on to say that the paper does not need animals to consciously teach, or every animal to be morally praiseworthy or blameworthy, because that we don't consider them to be moral agents. They're moral patients in the same way that cognitively disabled human beings are, such as those with Alzheimer's or dementia or people with learning difficulties. But what it does need is enough similarity to share for shared genuine attention, enough difference for genuine learning, which we've already demonstrated a few examples. Clever Hans the horse was incredibly intelligent, the Sylvia's cat example. We've already looked at some examples. So number 2, we're going on to perception, self, and moral reality. So this is going to now touch on how Murdoch, Whale, and Zen disagree about what must disappear for us to see clearly. So there are some trivial and substantive disagreements here, but so the way that Murdoch looks at this, Iris Murdoch, is that she sees it as though value is discovered through a better gaze, and she uses the term of loving gaze effectively. So she sort of sees this contrast between distorted vision and the way in which a human being or the self protects itself from fantasy or fiction. It sees what it fears, the self protects itself with fantasy and fiction, I should say. It sees what it fears, wants, or expects. And if we contrast that with attention, we can see that the individual stays within the forefront of our attention. We see the vulnerability or the cruelty or the fear. Self-centered distortions like Lucen, it's completely in contrast with this distorted sense. So the world and another being come into a clearer view. So you're having access to a greater, wider form of knowledge. Not all knowledge there are different forms of knowledge, of course. Not all knowledge needs to be through abstraction and sort of syllogistic knowledge. So so in contrast with that, Simone Weil goes even further. So she sort of saw the self as something that needed to be annihilated entirely, and she thought that Iris Murdoch's sort of interpretations was that in order for, there's many reasons why we might want to consider the self as sort of if there's no self, then there's no individual subject to become better and to sort of improve their character, etc. Whereas Simone Weil saw value as something that is quite literally rising from the natural world itself through teleology, through human experience, animal experience, and we're all this very monistic view. She wanted to withdraw from the sense of I entirely, so fully, such that the self would be the self-dissolution basically, or a dissolving of the self, I should say, and that reality can appear without our inference. Interference, I should say. And Iris Murdoch had it that the self creates illusion. So, and I don't entirely think that these views are incompatible. I think that they do go in slightly extreme opposite directions, but I think that you can see the self as having this sort of color of being an epistemic fiction that is necessary to engage as a practical agent, respond to reasons, and to sort of morally deliberate, but also that if we look at this from a more metaphysical perspective and just look at the sheer ontology of the way that the world presents itself, we can consider the self as just purely being an epistemic illusion, and what we're really left over with when we dissolve all of that is just experience and appearance, and Whale has this much more monistic view. So there's the sort of contrast between the two. So Iris Murdoch, and this goes into Zen Buddhism as well, but Zen offers a third solution or third perspective, which is neither a solid self nor its annihilation, kind of what I was touching on. So Iris Murdoch uses the term unselfing, and she goes on to say that a real individual learns to see more honestly, right, through their engagement with the world. And Simone Weil talks about decreation, that the illusory self withdraws before reality. Now, Zen, with its sort of non-dual perspective, or that's translated into not two, right? You can think, for example, looking at a like a coin, you can either see two sides to a coin, or you can just see one side that goes all the way around. It's more a sort of figment of or more of an epistemic projection that we would even see two sides to a coin, or sort of as Hume would have it, like with creation. You can either look at creation as like the way that we define understand creation, or cause, I should say, is always in relation to an effect, and an effect always in relation to a cause. And when you see one billiard ball hit into another billiard ball, you don't really see anything over and above effect or cause. There's not like some floating free cause, it's just sort of matter or substance or concrete states of affairs changing. So and our perception recognizing it. So this is the sort of non-dualist view that's central to Zen Buddhism, and it wants to say that in full attention there is simply the encounter. So all there is in the metaphysical sense, in the deepest sense, is just pure encounter and appearance. And there is a shared aim here, which is the reduction of ego and the sense of just purely I, and things matter because I care about them. If we maybe look at some of the more extreme sort of moral anti-realist, moral subjectivism views. Not all moral relativists or moral subjectivists, but primarily, moral cultural relativists, and some of the more sort of staunch moral anti-realists, they're very much focused on how desires or might makes right is primarily what matters. But I think it's also fair to say that a lot of sort of theists, a lot of non-secular like individuals believe that it's dependent on God's stances or God's desires. There's not like any sort of independent value in the world or disvalue. So yeah, shared aim, less ego, more reality. And next we go on to the ways in which we can think of an individual, a being such as a cow, and rather than giving this cow a specific name, recognizing them through attention, loving attention, a just gaze, they disappear behind a product, such as dairy. We see a glass of full fat milk. We don't see animal secretions. We don't see a mother yearning for her calf that's just been stripped away. We don't see the fear in her eyes. We don't see the breaking down of her muscle tissue and her bone density as she's contained within a small space and unable to even turn around because her body is so contained within a small metal cage. We don't see the ways in which she's artificially seminated and raped and exploited by the dairy industry. So we can either see output, we can see a dairy product, or we can see a mother, an individual mammal whose body, just my computer is running low on charge, bear with me. So we can either see it through that sort of descriptive lens again, like we were talking about in my last video, or we can see an animal in need, whose value matters in and of itself. Again, with the pig, which I touched on in my last video, we see the weight, capacity, delivery time, pure logistics, descriptions, or we see a frightened individual. We see its breath, we feel its heartbeat, we feel the movement. Attention does not add the vulnerability, it refuses to look away from it. So our attention isn't what creates disvalue. Just like in the last video, our desire is not what creates disvalue or creates value. Rather, it's a response to already existing value, disvalue, or something in need of being attended to. So it goes on to say that attention does not replace rights, it shows us who rights are for. Animals are not only beings we value, they can help us learn how to perceive value. The animal does not matter because we notice, we notice because she already matters. And then if you guys are interested, I would recommend searching up and trying to find Sylvia's paper on attending like a dog on ethical attention on learning I can't speak. Attending like a dog on learning ethical attention from other animals. It's been a really impactful paper for me, and that has been the main sort of key theme. So it's been the central paper that we've been discussing. Um, yeah, and then there's also some other papers here, such as the one on Zen and the differences between Murdoch, Vale, and Zen. And yeah, thank you for watching. I hope anyone that watches got something out of it. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.